Okay, so our blocking is done and we're finally ready to spline the shot. So I'm just gonna grab the whole character and all of my keys and then just press T and switch to Bezier. And let's just play the animation first to see what it looks like. So I think it's pretty good already. I don't see any huge things that need changing besides the IK arcs. You can see, for example, here, between those keys where we have this gap, the arms start bending like this. So again, if you're working in FK, you're not gonna have this issue. If you work in IK, you will. So you can do two things at this point. Either switch to FK if you want to, and the arcs will correct themselves for you, or you can just continue using IK and use motion paths and then just track the arcs there. And that's what I'm gonna do, but it's totally up to you how you wanna approach it. But the very first thing I want to do is go back to the cog and this forward movement. Remember how we had that straight linear line through the jump? Well, now that we changed to Bezier, I want to make sure it's still linear. So from 53 to 62, I want to make sure that it's straight. So I'm just basically going to delete the two keys between and select 53 and 62 and just change those to linear. And that makes sure that this always stays straight. And at this point, I don't need these markers anymore and they're just cluttering my view. So I'm just gonna quickly select them and just delete them. Now I can make my timeline a little bit smaller so I have more room for the graph editor. And the next thing I wanna address right away, I'm gonna go into those motion paths, but I'm gonna be tracking the cog first, because I want to work from there. This is the first thing I want to get right, and then I'm gonna build my way up to the spline and so on, like we did in the weight shift, for example. So motion paths, calculate, and all of these settings are okay. And for the camera view, to see them, you have to have the viewport overlays enabled, and you can just hide your bones so you don't see those, but you have to have motion paths on. I'm also gonna get my ground plane back. So the character is going down here, but you see that around frame 47, the line is very flat. So I'm just gonna bring the cog lower. And that makes the arc nicer. And maybe push 42 higher as well. And get one more key here. And that really helps give me that nice arc here. The jump is looking good, but maybe these frames around 57, which is the peak, I might want them to be higher. I want to make sure the leg isn't overstretching. And same thing on frame 59, I'm gonna bring him higher so that I have that hover around here, around the top position. Then on frame 60 is where the legs touch the ground, and then he starts shooting down. But you can see that the line is kind of crooked here. So let me just move those keys to make a prettier curve through here. And I'm also looking at the motion path from a different angle, and that would be my X location. And I just want to see what's happening here. So there is a weight shift through here, which is fine, but then the weight shifts to the other side really rapidly here and then just stays flat. So I want to actually ease into that. Okay, so our translations on the cog are looking good now. Even the motion path is pretty good. So now I'm gonna start looking at the rotations, and I can just delete that motion path at this point because I don't need it. It's mostly for translations. So down is Max leaning back and up is Max leaning forward. And I'm just shaping the curve to have more of an ease here. There's barely any Y rotation, and the part that I have seems fine. The thing I'm noticing on the spine here is that he's going down and then he kind of goes back up a little, which Brian is doing as well, but I want to make sure it's feeling right. And also it feels like the body is kind of swinging around the head. So I'm just gonna double check what's happening in this area. And I'm gonna start with the lower spine and work my way up. So even right here, you can see that the chest rotates really quickly and then it's pretty straight here. So I think I just need another key here and ease into that. And we also have some translations here too to deal with. And then I'm gonna go to the next part and work my way all the way to the chest. And I'm always wiggling the key around to see what it does to the character and which way they're moving. And then I'm kind of analyzing the movement and seeing if I need an ease or if I need to delete something, and especially if the curve is like this where it's flat, moves a lot, and it's flat again. Chances are that I added a key somewhere in blocking and then I never touched that controller again through here. So I just want to see if it needs to be moving in any way. And now I'm looking at the pelvis and doing exactly the same thing. And let's not forget the neck, which is pretty much an extension of the spine too. Okay, and for the feet, there's definitely points where the foot is supposed to plant on the ground faster and it doesn't, like here, this foot here. So the heel touches the ground, and then let's say 2 frames later, I'm just gonna have it fully planted. And with the toe, I'll have it slightly in the air, and then on the next frame, it's gonna be planted. There's just a little bit of an overlap. And then this foot here touches the ground and then it's traveling back. So I need to fix that for sure. So I'm noticing on the far foot that here it plants with the heel and then 2 frames later it slides back. And that's because I have a rotation on the foot instead of that heel controller. So what I'll do on the frame where it plants, I'm just gonna Control C and Control V the next pose so that that's zeroed out, and I'm just gonna use that heel to create the bank on the foot instead. And I should have done that from the beginning, I just didn't notice that I was using the foot controller for these rotations. So you gotta be careful about that. And I'm quickly gonna check the shoulders before I start working on the arms, because I know that the shoulders affect the arm and they can either make it look overstretched or very bent. So I want to have those more or less in order before I start dealing with the hands. And this far shoulder, I don't have to worry too much about it, just because we can't really ever see it. So only if there's any huge peak like this, I'm just gonna examine it to see if it's actually doing anything or changing the arm. But for example, here on this Y translation, it's not really doing anything, so I'll just bring it down here. And this one is doing something. You can see the far elbow being affected. So I definitely have to be more careful with that. And next is the head. So no translation, just rotations. Down is up is down, as it tends to be. And here, this key was high up here, but I want him to start looking forward sooner when he's about to jump, so I brought it down. And here I shifted these two keys so that the head is delayed rotating up. So now it looks like he takes a breath and then the head reacts slightly after. And I think it would be nicer if he held that breath for a couple of frames more. So I might actually grab everything here. And all these keys at the end when he's exhaling, I'll move them back 2 frames, and then on frame 118, I'll just use Shift E and bring it back to like 27%, favoring the previous key, so that he holds that breath longer before he exhales. And let me actually add those keys to the timeline as well so we can see them. So now he takes longer to take that breath, but basically I started easing out of it slower. And instead, maybe I actually wanna grab frame 115 and bring it there, so he's taking longer to inhale instead. And I like that more. So instead of inhaling on frame 115 or 116 and then just slowly exhaling, I move that key and instead he's taking longer to inhale and then he exhales faster. So just playing around with that and seeing what works. Okay, and now I think it's time to address those arms because that's the biggest thing I keep seeing. So I'll start with the hand that's closer to us because that's the one we see all the time. And I'm just gonna go to pose, motion paths, calculate. And you can see a lot of pretty straight lines through here. So let's just go from the beginning and zoom in and just see what we can do. So here on frame 44, we can see that chicken arm. So let's bring it back. And the arc is already changing. And we'll have to just keep adding more frames. That's the bad thing about working in IK. So there's always a trade-off for everything. a pose like this, I'm also looking at it from the front view because the arm is going sideways like this. So even though I always see it from the side view, so the curve here must work, it's also a good idea to make it work from this angle. Okay, and I'm gonna delete the motion path because it's a little hard to see what's happening. And I'm gonna add more drag to the wrists in some of these poses, like here for example. So on the way down, the wrist is gonna be dragging up. And on the way forward, it's gonna be dragging back. Also be careful from a different angle, you don't want it to look broken like this. The arms are going forward here at the same time, as you can see from the front view. So I'm just gonna delay one of them. Now it feels more natural. So for part of it, I delayed it by 1 frame and part of it is 2 frames. And now you can see that overlap on them. They also seem to be twinning through here a little, but I haven't addressed the position on the other arm yet. So I think what I'm gonna do is do the motion pass on the far arm right now and fix this first and then see what it's looking like. Okay, now I can delete that path. And what I need to do on this hand, there's some rotations happening that don't look so appealing. So I'm just gonna go back in there and change those rotations on the wrist. This swing on the arm back feels very slow, so I think I'm gonna delay this chunk of the animation. And the arm is overstretching here too. And that is definitely because I moved those keys. This foot kicks forward quite fast here. Let me see if I can delay it a little. I think here I want to delay this leg kicking forward because it feels like it's in the same position for a while, and maybe even bring it higher. Okay, I think at this point it's time to play blast the animation. Also, don't forget to save your file. So right now I have this frame where the legs are very straight before the landing, so these two poses are looking very similar. So here I'm gonna fix the legs, make them look more like the reference. And that's right here on 61. Maybe I'll try bringing the hip lower on that landing. And I actually feel like I don't need this frame here on 65. It's slowing down my animation a lot. I don't think I want to have it. So let me grab everything, keyframe 64, and then delete frame 65, and then bring everything back by one frame. See what that looks like. So I definitely need some small adjustments, especially on the spacing on the arm closer to us, but that's totally expected. Okay, and I think I'm gonna do one more play blast without any background, just to see what it's looking like, because it's a little distracting with the camera moving around. So let's do that. Okay, so I also added some shadow and these two simple cubes to represent a cliff, just so he's jumping over something. And I changed the lighting a little bit to make it brighter. So let's see what it's looking like now. Okay, so I think the animation is looking pretty good now, except I feel like we could tighten the timing a little bit and make the animation more springy. So the places I'm noticing in particular are here before the jump. So we have the stretch frame here, and the frame before that is really close to that. And we do want to explode into that jump more. So I feel like I'll keep this frame. I might get rid of this one here and then have this frame here. And then I might change the spacing between these frames here so that the one in the air is closer to the one here, just to get that hover. And then at the end, he touches the ground and goes down a little bit with the arm behind. And here the spacing is kind of small, but I want it to feel like he falls into that squat much faster. So I think, again, I'll change the spacing a little bit and I might actually get rid of one frame here. So let's try that. Okay, so I'll grab everything on max and all the curves. And then I'm gonna go to that frame, which is here, frame 52. And I'll be getting rid of that. And to make sure all of my animation stays untouched before and after, I'll first go to frame 53 and press I to key everything, and also on frame 51. And then I can safely delete frame 52, and I'll grab everything that comes after and do GX-1 to bridge that gap. So now we go straight from this pose to this pose. And then the pose on 53, I'm not gonna touch the Y location because, again, I wanna have that linear motion here. So I'm just gonna go to Z location here And you can even see how this frame could be higher. And here as well. So again, I'm going for that bouncing ball spacing. And then we talked about here, he touches down on frame 61. And we have frame 62 that I might want to get rid of. So again, same thing, grab everything, keyframe 61, key 63, delete frame 62, and bring everything back by 1 frame. And now that we've gotten rid of 2 frames, I'll shrink my timeline by 2 frames as well, so that the animation ends where it ended before. And now you can see he lands on his heels, and then he drops quite a lot. But then here's a little bit of a slowdown. So let me play around with that spacing here. So now the spacing on the animation feels a little more snappier. And that's something you often do. You first follow your reference, but then once you play the animation and if it's feeling either a little floaty or a little slow, you might find a couple of areas where you want to remove a key and just play around with the spacing more. And now I'm looking at this foot that's still on the ground here, and it looks like the arc on it is a little odd when you're tracking the ankle. It goes up and then to the right. So I'm just gonna grab that and create a motion path. And you can even see it here. Okay, so now the curve on that foot is feeling better. I'm gonna delete that motion path. And I'll just look for anything else that I feel like needs fixing. Okay, so we'll do one more play blast now to see if everything is looking better, and we'll be back. Okay, yeah, it's definitely looking snappier, and I think that's actually everything that we needed. The animation is looking pretty good now, and all the mechanics are working. So if you follow all those principles we talked about, then your animation should turn out looking something like this. So we'll provide this example file for you and also the reference that we used. But as always, we also encourage you to shoot your own reference and make your own version, because you learn a lot more from being forced to do it independently, just using those principles you've learned in the video, as opposed to just fully following with the video on every step. So I hope this video was helpful and you've learned something, and we can't wait to see what you make. So once you're done with your animation, feel free to post it on Circle for everybody else to see and give you some notes. And until then, happy animating, and we'll see you in the next video.